look, if you want to lose weight, you have to cut carbs. You have to go very low carb. Well, at least that's what low carb enthusiasts are going to tell you. Is that like completely true? Is there more to it than that? Or is it utter BS? My name is Joe Leach. I'm an online dietitian. I've been talking about this topic probably since 2014. This video is for you if you've got a weight loss goal, or maybe you've thought about some sort of low carb diet, or you've tried it before. And I've also got a guide at the end for you guys. Just quickly, so low carb theory is like, it's a hypothesis basically. It's not proven, but it's that if you lower your carbs, you'll therefore lower the hormone insulin, and therefore your body cannot store any fat. And so basically the idea is that if your insulin is really low, then calories don't matter because you won't store fat anyway, because it's not about calories, it's about how much insulin is in your blood. And so now they studied this in really good clinical trials, which means like you have a large group of people who will follow a low carb ketogenic diet, and a large group of people who will follow a regular or higher carb diet, I suppose, and then we can measure their insulin levels, measure their weight change, things like that. And the really good studies were funded by the low carb enthusiasts because this is how much they believed their insulin hypothesis to be true. And the reality was they found that there was no difference in fat gain between these two different types of diet. In fact, the higher carb diet seemed to perform better in terms of the weight goals and the outcomes they measured. And I'm referring to the Kevin Hall studies particularly. I think the first one was 2017, but there's been plenty more around that study as well, which finds the same thing, that low carb is not inherently better for fat loss than other types of diets that have higher carb intake. And if you don't trust the studies, which is how we can prove anything, but if you don't trust that data, you can look at historical and epidemiological data. So historically, what about populations that eat very high carb diets? They should all be very overweight and obese, going by the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. Even there's still populations today that eat very high carb diets. We can look at these and then actually make sense of it all. Historically, we have the Kitavans who are in Papua New Guinea, and there was also, I think the Tarahumara Indians, so indigenous Americans, who were eating very high carb diets, like 70% plus. And I mean, typically in a Western diet with all our junk foods and things like that, we're probably at about 60% of our calories from carbs. They were eating 70% of their calories from carbs, and they've been well studied, like the Kitavans, I think it was in the 70s, and overweight people like didn't exist. Literally, like there was no record. Their insulin levels are very low. They're eating very high carb diets. Some will say, yeah, well, because they were so active, right? They're moving around all the time. Like there was no, this is not like they're driving around and doing things like that. Well, yeah, but then that means you are agreeing that calories matter because they're burning more calories than we do in our sedentary lifestyles. Let me give you a current modern day example. So Okinawa, an island in Japan, it's referred to as a blue zone. They have the most centenarians in the world, the most people over the age of 100. Now, if you get over the age of 100, you're probably doing some things right, especially if a lot of people are getting past that marker. In the 50s, they ate up to 85% of their calories from carbs, particularly potatoes. 85%. It's ridiculous. It's like you're not eating hardly any protein or any fat, of course. And so that's in the 50s. So 70 years on, they're doing pretty well because they have the most people over 100 years. So if carbs were inherently bad for you and fattening, then we wouldn't we wouldn't see this in Okinawa. We wouldn't see this in the historical data. I know what you might be thinking. Well, I don't care. I don't believe that because I did low carb and it worked for me. And this is confirmation bias, like a perfect example. So even though presented with factual data, it can be hard for us humans to take that on when we have our own bias and our own experience. The reality is a low carb diet worked for you or is working because you cut your calories. Because when you cut out these high carb foods, you cut out calories from your diet, because high carb foods that we eat in Western societies are high in calorie because they're high carb plus high fat. When someone says, yeah, I'm not eating carbs, I'm not having chocolate. Well, the sugar is not where the calories come from in chocolate. It's fat. It's more fat than carbs, chocolate. But people will call it a carb. You're cutting out fat plus carbs. I'm not having ice cream. I'm not having French fries. I'm not eating burgers. I'm not having pizza. These are all things that have more fat than carbs. Yet we call them carb foods. I'm cutting carbs. I'm not eating sugar. A, they're more fat than carbs, but B, they're fat plus carbs. That's the problem. They're two macronutrients that provide calories. When you put them together, you have very calorie dense foods. So when you're cutting out those high carb foods that we call them, you're actually getting rid of high carb plus high fat foods, which are high calorie. And therefore you're reducing your calories. Therefore you're creating a calorie deficit and losing weight. Makes sense? Second thing is that the keto and very low carb work really well in the beginning. And that's great because you get that motivation to keep going until it stops working. The reason it works really well in the beginning is because carbs stored in our body bind to water. Okay, so 1 gram of carbohydrate can typically hold 3 grams of water or H2O. Okay, and a well-fed, sustained adult can hold up to 500 grams of carbs as glycogen on the body. So that means 500 grams of carbohydrate stored because you're eating carbs, and 3 times more as water held on your body. So that would be 1,500 grams or 1.5 kilos, about 3 pounds of water. So when you deplete these carb stores, you're also depleting 3 pounds of water. Gone. So on the scales, you get quick results, and that seems amazing. But guess what happens when you introduce carbs back in your diet? The favored fuel source, your body is going to hold on to that like, oh yes, I'm not deprived of this great nutrient. We're going to store this bad boy straight away. And then what happens when you store 500 grams of carbs? It holds on to 1,500 grams of water, and then the scale goes back up. And so it's that initial change that makes the low carb very attractive in the beginning and getting you that small win. But we need to be thinking about actual sustainable fat loss long term. So yeah, that's the truth about low carb diets and weight loss. Yes, low carb can help you to lose weight, but it's because initially carbs bind to water, and more importantly, it's because you're actually cutting calories from your diets. It's not the carbs themselves. When we talk about carbs, we're actually referring to carbs plus fat, and that equals lots of calories. So basically, a low carb diet is a low junk food, a low calorie dense diet, and lo and behold, of course, it leads to weight loss. If you found this useful, make sure you give us a thumbs up or a heart. Leave a comment if you've got any questions. And yeah, if you want my weight loss guide, so I've loads of evidence-based tips on how to do it sustainably. You can really look through and see, because different things work for different people. We're all different. So have a look you can have a look at that resource and really determine what resonates with you and what you would like to try. If you want that, just comment guide and I can send it to you.